a Rabbinic Anthology selected by C.G. Montefiore and H.Loewe, but practically there are certain important differences to be observed between rabbinic and patristic weeds. First, some, at least of the rabbinic, were wild and impassioned obiter dicta. They were outbursts against persecution. They were not coldly deliberate arguments penned in scholarly treatises by ecclesiastics who had nothing to fear from those against whom they wrote. If a Judah ben Baba, who with his disciples lived in hourly danger merely on account of his religion, and who, to ensure the escape of his disciples, actually perished, was occasionally guilty of a harsh generalization about the wickedness of Gentiles. We may well deplore it. If we cannot excuse it, we can at least understand it. But can we, in the same way, palliate in an Ambrose powerful enough to defy the Roman emperor a calculated incitement to persecution, not a mere heated and purposeless generalization? Incidentally, it is well worth noting in humility and gratitude that when it comes to the supreme moment, martyrs, Christian and Jewish alike, seem to forget their persecutors. They utter no words of bitterness. Their last thoughts are of God. Secondly, we must bear the following phenomenon in mind. Patristic weeds are spurlos, versenkt, certainly as far as Jews are concerned. Most Jews are ignorant of the patristic literature altogether. They certainly have not had their attention drawn to handfuls of weeds, specially collected to illustrate the superiority of Judaism over Christianity. Unfortunately, in spite of noble correctives, the converse is still not true. What then is to be the Jewish attitude to Jewish weeds? We must, I think, steer a plain middle course. We must not, as is sometimes done, possibly I myself have to plead guilty occasionally, to seek to justify or absolute condemnation is called for without equivocation. But we must not, on the other hand, lose our sense of proportion, and we certainly must not condemn everything which others condemn. Because it shouldn't be about mere opinion of yourself or society's mere opinion. Mr. Montefiore, I tis kai alas, avoids his scylla and Charybdis, and if, instead of too ready, he had said somewhat ready, or sometimes ready, this note would not have been written. H.L. I'm glad I wrote too ready, for therefore has the reader secured this excellent note. And one of the things that we do need to consider is Khazaria, Israel, the Zionist movement, people who have, in their liberalism, and by liberalism I mean the stepping away from religious and family values, but yet at the same time considering themselves okay faith-wise, what they have said and did. Selection 74, Tunch Yitro, section 12, folio 125a. And God spake all these words, all at one and the same moment. At one and the same moment he slays and brings to life, smites and heals, answers the woman in travail, those in peril on the sea, those who wander in the desert, those imprisoned in dungeons, one in the east, one in the west, one in the north, one in the south. He forms the light, creates darkness, makes peace, and creates evil. Isaiah 45:7. All these at one and the same instant. Dust is turned into man, and man into dust. He turns the shadow of death into morning. Amos 5:8. Water to blood, and blood to water. Living flesh to carrion, which again he revives. The staff was transformed to a serpent, and the serpent to a staff. The sea to dry land, and the dry land to sea. This is the meaning of, and God spake all these words. Tunch, Yitro, section 12, folio 125a, 75. Mech, Sharata, Beshalach, section 8, page 143. Mech, volume 2, page 62, 63, and see also selection 901. Not as man's capacity is God's capacity. A man cannot say two words at one and the same moment, but God said all the 10 commandments at one and the same moment. Man cannot hearken to two people who cry before him together, but God can hearken to all the inhabitants of the world if they cry before him simultaneously. As it is said, O thou that hearest prayer, unto thee does all flesh come. Psalm 65:2. Mech, Sharata, Beshalach, section 8, page 143, Mech, volume 2, page 62 and 63, and see also selection 901. And selection 76, Pes R 100b. The Lord talked with you face to face in the mount. Deuteronomy 5:4. Rabbi Yohanan said, 1,000 people look at a statue, and each one says, it is at me that the statue is looking. So God looks at every single Israelite and says, I am the Lord thy God. Our Levi said, you can learn the same lesson from everyday life. One voice can enter 10 ears, but 10 voices cannot enter one ear. Yet God hears the prayers of all his creatures as if they were one prayer. As it says, O thou that hearest prayer, unto thee does all flesh come. Psalm 65:2. It does not say prayers, but prayer. R. Jose B. Aben said in the name of Joshua B. Levi, face to face like a hero who whirls his sword and shows its blade in every direction. Pes R 100b. Selection 77 from Exodus R. Yitro 28:5. The ways of God are not as the ways of man. A human king does not both wage war and teach children, but God is not so. One day he wages war, as it is said, the Lord is a man of war, Exodus 15:3, and the next day, at the giving of the law, he comes down to teach the law to his children, Exodus R. Yitro 28:5. But while God's power is unlimited, and while in his inmost nature there is never change, yet in the close relation of God to man, and far more in the far closer relation of God to Israel, the actions of man affect the power, even as they affect the happiness of God. They affect his power, that is, so far as it is manifested in the world. A fine general passage is the following. Selection 78. Midrash Psalm on 103:9, 218b and 12. Not for victory, RV forever, will he contend. Psalm 103:9. Did I not contend with the generations of the flood, and the dispersion, and the men of Sodom. And because I was victorious, did I not suffer loss? But when Moses won the victory over me, i.e., when God pardoned Israel's sin of the golden calf, did I not gain profit in my world? That is why it says, not for victory will he contend, and for the sake of the world he will bear no grudge. See RT, page 107, also selections 103 and 627. Midrash Psalm 103:9 to 118b, section 12. More frequent are passages like these: 79, Lamentations R 133 on 1:6, R Azariah, in the name of R Judah, B Simon said, when the Israelites do God's will, they add to the power of God on high. When the Israelites do not do God's will, they, as it were, weaken the great power of God on high. The biblical proofs are too forced to quote. Lamentation R 133 and 1:6. Selection 80, Midrash Psalm on 123:1. 255a, section 2. Pesach 102b. For the converse, see selections 83 to 85. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord. It's probably Yahweh that they're saying. And I am God. Isaiah 43:12. That is, when ye are my witnesses, I am God, and when ye are not my witnesses, I am, as it were, not God. Midrash Psalm on 123:1, 255a, section 2, Pesach 102b. For the converse, 83 to 85. 81, Mech Shirata Beshalach, section 5, page 134, Mech, volume 2, page 41. When the Israelites do God's will, they make his left hand as his right hand. But when they do not do his will, they make, if one may say so, his right hand as his left. If they do God's will, he sleeps not. But if they do not do his will, then, if one may say so, he sleeps. If they do his will, wrath is not by him. But if they do not do his will, wrath is by him. If they do his will, he fights for them. And if they do not do his will, he fights against them. And even if one may say so, they make the merciful one cruel. I admit the proof text, the passage is one of many of the same kind. It begins better than it ends. It begins on the frequent note that, in a certain sense, man can make greater or weaker the power, or rather the results of the power of God. It ends in a piece of particularism, which I omit. And Mech Shirata Beshalach, section 5, page 134, Mech, volume 2, page 41. And this is particularly a series that would be good to comment with references if people know the rest of what's being quoted or something that relates and they can give a number or whatever. The Quran, well, Islam in general, and what they call Zoroastrianism kind of stands against this. You can't, that there's people who don't do the will of God, or that God sleeps and that sort of stuff. Now, you may not submit to the will of God, but God is not, because it limits God's power to say that, God's will isn't being done. Well, that's a difficult one, because it's like, why do people choose evil and ignorance? It's like, well, the will was that they had the opportunity, and the consequences that come from that physically and otherwise, Israel's frequent lack of faith or idolatry weakens God's power. You see, now, they would also disagree with that, although we're supposed to be active in the spiritual war. Selection 82. Sifra, Deuteronomy, Ha-Azanu, section 319, folio 136b, finish to 137a, More 1, 472, RT, page 339. Thou didst forget God that formed thee, Deuteronomy 32:18. Each time that I sought to do you good, you weakened the power on high. You sought by the Red Sea. Do they say Red Sea in this reference, or do they say Reed Sea, like tonic? And said, This is my God, and I will praise him. Exodus 15:2. And then you returned and said, Let us make a captain, and let us go back to Egypt. Numbers 14:4. You stood at Mount Sinai and said, All that the Lord has spoken to us, we will do, and I sought to do you good. But you returned and said to the calf, This is thy God, O Israel. Lo, whenever I seek to do you good, you weaken the power which is on high. Sifra, Deuteronomy, Ha-Azanu, section 319, folio 136b to 137a, More 1, 472, RT, page 339. Selection 83, Midrash Psalm on 23:1, 255a, section 2, More 2, 104, 3, 181. Unto thee do I lift up my eyes, O thou that sittest in the heavens. Psalm 123:1. This implies that when I do not lift up my eyes, thou wouldst not be sitting in the heavens. See selection 80, Midrash Psalm on 123:1, 255a, section 2, More 2, 104, 3, 181. The idea is softened down in passages like the following, selection 84, Sifra, Deuteronomy, Barakah, section 346, folio 144a. R. Simeon B. Yochai said, Like as when a man who brings together two ships and binds them together with ropes and cords, and builds a palace upon them, while these ships are lashed together. The palace stands, and when they drift apart, it cannot stand. So only when Israel does God's will is his heavenly palace secure. And it also says, Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my eyes, O thou that sittest in the heavens. Nevertheless, our Simeon B. Yochai also quoted Exodus 15:2, This is my God, and I will make him lovely. And he said, When I praise him, he is lovely, and when I do not praise him, he is, so to speak, lovely in himself. Note 64, Sifra, Deuteronomy, Barakah, section 346, folio 144a. Selection 85, Mech Sharata Betshalach, section 3, page 128, Mech, volume 2, page 28. Remember, the abbreviations are the end of the introduction of Loewe. I appended it to that. R. Simeon B. Elazar said, When the Israelites do God's will, his name is exalted in the world. When they do not do his will, his name is, as it were, profaned in the world. Even as it says, And they profaned my holy name. Ezekiel 36:20. See selection 80. Mech Sharata Betshalach, section 3, page 128. Mech, volume 2, page 28. And yet, in deeper sense, God's holiness, his holiness as he is in himself, is unaffected by Israel's sin. Selection 86, Sifra 86c. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto all the congregation of Israel, and say unto them, Holy shall ye be, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Why was this section of the law to be said before all the congregation? Because the majority of the most important commandments of the law are contained in it. Be ye holy, for I am holy. That is, if you sanctify yourselves, I reckon it as if you sanctified me. And if you do not sanctify yourselves, I regard it as if you did not sanctify me. It does not mean to say, if you sanctify me, I am sanctified, and if you do not do so, I am not sanctified. For it says, I am holy, I abide in my holiness, whether you sanctify me or not. RT, page 36, Sifra 86c. The paradox is found that there is a sense in which man can even prevail over God. Selection 87, MK 16b. The words in 2 Samuel 23:3, he that rules over men must be just, AV, are quoted. What do they mean? R. Abahu said, they mean I, God, rule over man, who rules over me, the just, for I ordain a decree, a punishment, and he annuls it by his just life or by his intercessory prayers. MK 16b. The great supplicators for Israel, Moses more especially, often cause God to forgive or to cancel a decree of doom, where otherwise he would not have done so. In all such cases, the rabbis, like most teachers of religion, ascribe human methods of action to the deity, but concurrently with such ascription, they always maintain God's unlikeness to man, his omniscience, for example, and his foreknowledge. Thus, a sentence like the following is a commonplace. Selection 88, Genesis R, Bereshit 9:3, page 69. Before a thought is framed in a man's heart, it is known already to God. Even before a man is fully formed, his thought is made manifest to God. Gen R Bereshit 9:3, page 69. After all, this sort of saying hardly goes beyond Psalm 139:4, which is quoted in this very connection, that man's free will, so important a doctrine to the rabbis, seems to conflict with God's foreknowledge, did not escape their observation. They could only assert both sides of the puzzle and leave it at that. Hence R. Akiba's famous saying, Selection 89, Abath 3:19, PB, page 194. Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is given, and the world is judged by grace, yet all is according to the amount of the work. Note 11b, Abath 3:19, PB, page 194. God created the world and created man. For what purpose? To what end? In the last resort, the rabbinic answer would, I suppose, be, he created the world for his own glory. Section 90, Abath 6:11. All that God created in his world he created only for his glory, as it is said, all that is called by my name for my glory, I created and fashioned and made it. Isaiah 43:7, Abath 6:11. Again, God created the world for his own pleasure, even as a king might build a palace for his own happiness. He saw all that he had created, and it was very good. Genesis 1:31. For God had once created worlds and destroyed them. Gen R 3:7, page 23, see note 6, after all these selections. So, selection 91, Gen R Bereshit 9:4, page 69, God said to his world, my world and my world, would that thou wouldest ever find favor before me, as thou findest favor before me now, i.e. at the time of creation. Gen R Bereshit 9.4, page 69. Selection 92, Tunch B, Wayekra 5B, AB, RN, verse 1, 41, finished, folio 69B. God said, all creatures have been created to praise me. As it's said, all the work of God is for his own sake. Proverbs 16:4. Literally, God has made everything for its own end. And see selection 992 when we get to that. God would have wished that all men should have been and remained righteous. Indeed, he hoped that they would be righteous. To be righteous was the end of man and the reason of their creation. And they were created with the possibility to be completely righteous. So let's not fall into this, oh, it's human. It's like, well, humans make mistakes, but it's their fault. Section 93, Sifra Deuteronomy Ha'azanu, Section 307, folio 132b, a God of faithfulness and without perversity, Deuteronomy 32:4, faithful because he had faith in the world and created it without perversity, for men were not brought into the world to be wicked, but to be righteous. God made man upright, but they sought out many sinful devices. Ecclesiastes 7:29, selection 401. We should consider in this regard, Sefer Deuteronomy Ha'azanu, section 307, folio 132b, fin. But more narrowly, God might, I suppose, be said to have created the world for man's sake, or again, that there might be a field for the exhibition of his own greatest qualities or attributes, justice, beneficence, compassion, loving kindness, for man is the noblest being. Selection 94 from Tanch B. Bashalach 31a. I will sing unto the Lord, for he has glorified himself gloriously. Exodus 15:1. R. Abin Halavi said, there are 4 glorious creatures in the world among wild beasts. The most glorious is the lion among cattle, the bull among birds, the eagle, but man exceeds them all. So God, who is glorious over the glorious, took them all and fixed them on his throne. Ezekiel 1:10 and 26. Tunch B. Bashalach 31a. And more narrowly still, but I think we must admit, most truly of all, God created the world for the sake of the Torah, or for the sake of Israel, the people of his choice, the people of his special and overwhelming love. In a way, this last reason for the world's creation coalesces with the reason that he created it for his glory, seeing that Israel's function is to display his glory. The great attributes of God are to the rabbis what I have mentioned. In other words, they are the great attributes of the highest teachings of the Old Testament, but the particularism of the rabbis usually prevented them, even as it prevented the writers of the Old Testament, from realizing that when God, for example, delivers the Israelites by the ruin and slaughter of their foes, there is any difficulty in regarding such a deliverance as anything more than a single example of God's goodness, mercy, or compassion. Similar instances of the weakness of human nature could, I fancy, be cited from the records of all theistic peoples down to the present day. Thus, after a passage dealing with the deliverance in the days of Esther and the slaughter of the Persians, 78,000 people, if they just went after the family of Haman, that would be understandable, but, we get a perfectly sincere utterance such as this. Selection 95, Esther R. 10:15 on 8:15. You will find that the good attributes of God are mentioned in the Bible repeatedly and in abundance. This is so as regards beneficence, loving kindness, mercy, righteousness, faithfulness, redemption, blessing, peace. Then follow a number of scriptural verses, ending up with the familiar, the Lord will give strength unto his people, the Lord will bless his people with peace. Psalm 29:11. Esther R. 10:15 on 8:15. Selection 96, Gen R. Bereshit 12:2, the page 70. R. Udon said, the world was created for the sake, literally because of the merit, of the Torah. R. Joshua B. Nehemiah said, for the sake of the tribes of Israel. Well, if you translate Israel to Mujahideen, or more literally, those who strive for God, then, that makes sense. Gen R. Bereshit 12:2, the page 70. 97 is Gen R. Bereshit 12:9, the page 107. R. Joshua B. Karcha and R. Azariah said, the world was created for the sake of Abraham. As to this great mass, i.e. the earth, for what end is it here? For the sake of Abraham, as it is said, thou hast made the heaven and the earth, and thou didst choose Abraham. Nehemiah 9:6 and 7, Gen R. Bereshit 12:9, the page 107. 98, Gen R. Bereshit 15:4, the page 137. God created man for the sake of Abraham. Gen R. Bereshit 15:4, the page 137. It is sometimes said that God created man in order that there might be creatures who fulfill his pre-existing law. But we also find the view expressed that the law was created for the sake of Israel, and I left out the note for Nehemiah 9:6 and 7. The citation from Nehemiah is considered to be of great importance, and it is included in the daily passages of praise, per book, page 34. Abraham is almost a cosmic type because of his linking earth up to heaven through the making of proselytes. Hence, Melchizedek commended Abraham to God, the maker of heaven and earth. Gen 14:19, H.L. Selection 99, Tunch B. Betchukote 56b. When God wanted to create man, the angels of the service said, what is man that thou art mindful of him? What dost thou seek to get from him? God said, he will fulfill my law and my commandments. They said, we will fulfill it. He said, you cannot. They said, why? He said, it is written, when a man dies, etc., you do not die. When a woman bears a child, you do not bear children. It is written, this shall ye eat. You do not eat. Tunch B. Betchukote 56b. Selection 100. Ecclesiastes R1, Section 4:1, Folio 2b. Was Israel created for the sake of the law, or the law for the sake of Israel? Surely the law for the sake of Israel. Now if the law which was created for the sake of Israel will endure forever, how much more Israel, which was created by the merit of the law? Ecclesiastes R1, Section 4:1, Folio 2b. One of the things about that passage that we might look at is, for example, that the Torah, as the books of Moses and so on, were after, in any sense of the term, were after Israel the prophet. So in that sense, you might not be able to take that one literally. It cannot be said too often that such variations are not differences of opinion, but still less conflicting teachings, but casual, exegetical, or homiletical conceits, More 1, 451, and 1. If more be right, it makes any attempt to ascertain the real opinions and beliefs of the rabbis very baffling and difficult. 101, Pes R 45b. If the whole world was created for the sake of Israel, some passages also occur in which it is said that it is only through or because of Israel that the Gentiles exist. Well, those who turn their backs on God have to turn their backs on something, right? Because that's what a Gentile is, a goyim, guya in the singular. Israel is compared to the sand on the seashore, and the Gentiles to lime. 1 Kings 4:20 and Isaiah 33:12. And remember, Gentile is regardless of your ancestry or nation. If sand is not put into the lime will not last. Thus, if it were not for Israel, the Gentiles could not last. But for Joseph, the Egyptians would have died of hunger. But for Daniel, the wise men of Babylon would have perished. Again, Israel is compared to the dust of the earth, without which the world could not abide. Without dust, there would be no trees and no produce from the earth. So if it were not for Israel, the Gentiles would not exist. For in thy seed shall all the Gentiles be blessed. Genesis 22:18. Pass R 45b. It is not needful to quote more than a few passages about God's goodness and loving care for man. When the rabbis, in a quiet mood, are not thinking about Israel and Israel's enemies, they often speak of God's goodness to all mankind, even to the wicked sometimes, and also to the animals. Selection 102. Midrash Psalm on 36:6, 125b, section 5. Leviticus R, Emor 27:1. Thy righteousness is like the mountains of God. Thy judgments are a great deep. Psalm 36:6. R. Josiah the Great interpreted the verse by a transposition. Thy righteousness is above thy judgments, as the mountains of God are above the great deep. As the mountains press upon the deep, so that it cannot rise up and overflow the world, so do the good deeds of the righteous press down the iniquities of the wicked, so that they may not cause the inhabitants of the world to perish on the day of judgment. As Micah says, he will turn again and have compassion upon us. He will press down our iniquities. Midrash Psalm on 36:6, 125b, section 5. Leviticus R, Emor 27:1. A similar thought is expressed by R. Jonathan in the selection 605. So I don't know how many more programs till we get to that. 103, Pass R, 32b, Finish 233a, Initial, see also number 78. Not forever will I strive, and not in eternity will I be wroth. Isaiah 57:16. The word netzach, eternity, can also mean victory, as in he will destroy death forever, or he will swallow up death in victory. Read then thus, to be conquered I strive, God said, when I conquer, I lose, when I am conquered, I gain. I conquered the generation of the flood, but did I not lose? For I destroyed my world. So too with the generation of Babel, so too with the Sodomites. But at the sin of the golden calf I was conquered. Moses prevailed over me, and I gained, in that I did not destroy Israel. Therefore the psalm title, Lem Netzach, to the chief musician, should be rendered to him who seeks to be conquered. And So they started off sort of Sufi-like and kind of went too far. Selection 104, XSR, Beshelich, 25.6. See also our 1652nd selection in this series. If a man, when he examines his bonds, finds that others owe him debts, he produces his bonds and exacts the debt. But if he finds that he owes a debt, he keeps back the bond and does not produce it. But God is not so. If we owe him, he suppresses the bond. As it is said, he will suppress our iniquities. Micah 7:19. But if he finds any merit in us, he produces it. As it is said, the Lord has brought forth our righteous acts. Jeremiah 1, verse 1 and 10. Because if we do good, we're only the means. If we do bad, we chose not to be such means. Many other quaint differences are given between God's ways and man's ways, and finally these. With men, a slave washes his master, dresses him, helps him on with his shoes, but with God it is the reverse. As it is said, I washed thee with water, I shod thee. Ezekiel 16:9 and 10. With men, when the master sleeps, the slave stands by his side, but of God it is said, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. And you have a similar line in Surah 255. But this quote is from Psalm 121:4. XSR Beshelich 25:6. CR 1652nd selection. Selection 105, Midrash Psalm on 118:1, 240, a finished section 5. For his mercy endures forever. Psalm 118:1. This is like a man who lent money to all the inhabitants of his city, and they said, we are grateful to him, for he supplies us with our needs in the rainy season, and takes from us only 3 denarii as interest in the hot weather. Well, the charging of interest doesn't say you can't charge it to the people of your own country. Then came another man and said, I will give you the same for 1 selah. So they left the first man and thanked the second. Then came a third man who said, I will give you the same for nothing. Was it not fitting to thank him most who gave it for nothing? So God sustains all his creatures for nothing. Is it not fitting to praise and give thanks to him? Midrash Psalm on 118:1, 248, and I say section, but it's supposed to be paragraph. In Tanakh, there isn't technically verses or paragraphs in the oldest reference, but we now have numbers and stuff that we use. 106, Abzar 3b, Sab 107b, RT, page 229. R. Judah said in the name of Rab, the day has 12 hours. In the first 3, God sits and busies himself with the Torah. In the next 3, he sits and judges the whole world, and whenever he sees that the whole world is guilty, i.e. deserves to be condemned, he arises from the throne of justice and sits on the throne of mercy. In the next 3, he sits and feeds the whole world, from the horned buffalo to the eggs of the loose. In the last 3, he sits and sports with the Leviathan. As it says, the Leviathan whom thou hast made to sport with. Psalm 104:26. Now it makes him sound like Marduk, doesn't it? Of course, Marduk and Tiamat were in the earlier myths not enemies, you could say. 107, Bab 50b, RT, page 109, see selection 849 and 1652. R. Chama said, long-suffering, Exodus 34:6. The Hebrew uses idiomatically a dual form which Chama interpreted to mean long-suffering both to the righteous and the wicked. Bab 50b, RT, page 109. See also the selections 849 and 1652 when we get to them. Selection 108, Yoma 69b. Moses called to God, the great, mighty, and awful God. Jeremiah said, the heathen ramp in his temple. And remember, heathen is not a term that refers to just being of a different race or religion. Heathen in English, it doesn't refer to religious differences, but what we're translating does. Ramp in his temple, where is his awfulness? So Jeremiah in his prayer omitted awful, Jeremiah 32:16-18. Daniel said his children are enslaved. Where is his might? So he omitted mighty in his prayer, Daniel 9:4. Then came the men of the great synagogue and said, on the contrary, that is the culmination of his power, that he represses his passion and is long-suffering toward the wicked. And if he were not awful, how could this one nation endure among all the nations of the world? Yoma 69b. When Moses summoned all Israel before God, he said, your captains, your judges, your elders, Deuteronomy 29:10. But God made him add the words, all the people of Israel. 109, Tanchbi Nitzabim 529, 525a. See also selection 1439. Now a man is more merciful to men than to women. Well, it depends on which one, right? But God's mercies are over all his creatures. Psalm 145:9. So Moses added the words, all the people of Israel, and continued, your little ones, your wives, and the stranger that is in thy camp, since God's mercies are on male and female alike, on the wicked equally with the righteous, as it says, from the hewer of thy wood to the drawer of thy water. All are equal before God, hence it says, all the people of Israel. Tanch be Nitzabim 525a. See also the selection 1439. 110, Tanch B, Nawach 17a. If men make a sea voyage and take cattle with them, should a storm arise, they jettison the animals to save mankind. One of the most famous Jim Morrison poems. Horse Latitudes. Because people do not love animals as much as they love human beings, not so is God's love. Just as he is merciful to man, so is he merciful to beast. You can see this from the story of the flood. When man sinned and God determined to destroy the world, he treated man and beast alike. I will destroy man and beast. Genesis 6:7. But when he was reconciled to both, and he pitied both man and beast alike. As we read in the narrative, God remembered Noah and the animals that were with him in the ark. Genesis 8:1, Tanch B, Noah 17a. The story of the ark was often used as the medium for inculcating kindness to animals. Section 124, 150, and 1172. Section 111 is Gen R Noach 3114, the page 287. Abba Bar Kahana said, Noah took with him a supply of vine tendrils for the elephants, cistus or ivy for the gazelles, and glass for the ostriches. Gen R, Noach 3114, the page 287. Glass for the ostriches. Some people think this animals that, do things to taste their blood or like actually eat some of the things like it's food rather than, it may be thought strange that with this divine pity for the animals, the commands about the sacrifices of the animals and about God's pleasure in those sacrifices should never have seemed inconsistent to the rabbis. Now, one of the things too is that some of the things that they eat that hurt them actually do provide some nourishment, but I guess it depends overall in different cases whether this is of overall benefit to the animals that eat thorns and that sort of stuff. It may seem all the more strange when we recall that the rabbis equally believed and taught the pronouncements of psalmists and prophets that God has no pleasure in animal sacrifices. Well, not in itself, I guess you could make that point. See page 25 and 26, or in page 42 of this book. We must, however, remember that originally no animal could be killed for food unless it was sacrificed, and subsequently Deuteronomy limited sacrifices to Jerusalem, permitting animals to be killed for food elsewhere. Unless we take the vegetarian point of view and regard all eating of animal food as unethical. Well, we should have morals more than we should have ethics, right? We are scarcely entitled to see any inconsistency. H.L. 112, Tunch B. Wayetze, 76a, 76b. The Lord supports those that have fallen and raises those that are bowed. Psalm 145:14. It does not say those who stand erect, but those who are bowed. Even the wicked he raises. R. Chia said, God's attributes are not those of man, for a man who has a wealthy friend cleaves to him and pines for him, but mocks at him as soon as the friend's power declines. In order to heighten the contrast between man and God, the rabbis frequently take this cynical view of human nature. It is probably that these cynical utterances must not be pressed too hard as if they were the regular and a permanent rabbinic view. God is far different. When he sees a man who has fallen into misfortune, he stretches his hand out and raises him, for it says, all those who have fallen, not all those who stand. Tunch B. Wayetze, 76a, 76b, Selection 103, Pes R, 195a, Fin 295b. R. Joshua ben Nehemiah said, I don't know if it's Ben or Bar, this is B. Have you ever seen it happen that the rain fell on the field of A, who is righteous, and not on the field of B, who is wicked? Or that the sun arose and shone upon Israel, who is righteous, and not upon the wicked? The nations. In Arabic, Gawin, same thing, but people don't but it's not an ancestry or nation thing. God causes the sun to shine both upon Israel and upon the nations, for the Lord is good to all. The passage goes on to say that man is often kind to his slaves and cruel to his animals, and the vice versa, but that God is merciful, both to man and beast. Pass R 195a, Fin 195b. Sep, who in mercy givest light to the earth, and to them that dwell thereon. Per book, page 37, Fin. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who givest light to the whole world in thy glory. Per book, page 293. These are respectively the first words of the congregational portion of the daily morning prayer, and the benediction on retiring to rest. Famous is the enumeration of the 13 norms or divisions or kinds of God's attribute of mercy, which were found in the great passage of Exodus 34, 6 and 7. These were obtained by omitting 2 words at the end of the half verse, for of nakeh, lo ya nakeh. The last 2 words are omitted. The 3 words mean he will surely not acquit, i.e. the guilty. The rabbis use only the first of the 3 words, which they take to mean acquitting or purifying, thus turning the words from their original meaning into their opposite. Thus we get 1, the Lord; 2, the Lord, for Yahweh is God, as the merciful one; 3, God, usually God. Elohim is the judge. God in his attribute is just severity. But here, that usual interpretation of Elohim is ignored. 4, merciful, and 5, gracious; 6, long-suffering and abundant in; 7, loving kindness, and 8, fidelity; 9, keeping mercy to 1,000 generations, forgiving; 10, iniquity; 11, transgression; and 12, sin; and 13, acquitting. Now, it does make sense because of different numbers of words that we need to point out the numbers. Selection 114, Pes K 57a. R. Johanan said, 13 kinds of mercy are written in the scriptures about God. Pes K 57a. There are several lines of exegesis in the interpretation of this difficult list of 13 attributes. I think I've done a video, Who Knows 13, but that's not the same 13. One of these is according to the literal sense, i.e., to make the words a saving clause, lest the complementary quality of divine justice be neglected, although this attribute follows immediately on the words under consideration. Thus the Septuagint has, and he will not clear the guilty. Well, don't think the Catholic Septuagint, the Jewish one, is lost. Ka'i u kathar-i ton anakan, and this interpretation persisted for several centuries. It is to be found even in the late and paraphrastic fragmentary so-called Jerusalem Targum, which has assuredly he will not acquit the guilty on the great day of judgment. It will be noted that this latter rendering takes account of the emphasized double verb in the original, which the Greek appears to overlook, but the other 2 Targumim take the double verb differently. Onkelos renders, he forgives those that return to his Torah, but those who do not return, he does not acquit. Mizki, we don't. Aside from the transliteration part, this may be the first instance of Hebrew characters in the book. As this is a literal Targum, the interpretation can be regarded as representing not Midrash, but the actual sense as it seemed to the Metergamon, the more paraphrastic pseudo-Jonathan, follows Onkelos, adding to the end, on the great day of judgment, or in the day of great judgment. Nathan Adler, in his commentary, Netanah Lampere on the Targum, and Locke says, the Targum Onkelos separates the first Hebrew verb, we, nekah, the emphasizing infinitive, from the finite verb, lo inakah, i.e. acquitting. He will not acquit sinners, and words left out before acquitting and after acquit. Onkelos thus considers that the only we nekah and not lo inakah belongs to the 13 attributes. Lo inakah must, Onkelos thinks, go with the following, visiting the iniquity. According to this method, the initial 3 words, Lord, Lord God, would be 2 attributes as the exegetes have regarded them, Rashi says, taken literally, the words mean that God is not indulgent to sin entirely, or all at once, but he exacts retribution for it little by little. The Midrash follows the lines of the Targum. Ibn Ezra discusses both ways, i.e. taking the infinite as the end of the attributes and taking it in its literal sense. Sforno adds a new thought. He will not pardon those who repent merely to avoid punishment. Well, there's a degree of not repenting with that, right? But this is hardly an early concept for Mitrakaman. See our selections when we get to him, 434 and 1215. Lo yanaka could be expounded as a rhetorical question, but since naqeh is not a finite verb, this cannot have been the original meaning. The same objection can be argued against the Targum as well. Even if a participle or finite verb be read for the infinitive, it is not possible to get the Targumic interpretation out of the Hebrew, but in any case, the Hebrew is unusual, since naqeh, lo, yanaqeh has no object, hence the liturgy ends the 13 attributes at naqeh and renders forgiving sin, words left out, and acquitting Goster, De Sola, Davis, and Adler. See also Heidenheim's note and citation from Nachmanides in his Atonement volume in the same location. Well, not same, in the location for the double verb. See selection 659. HL did the note.